Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is your lesson on lurking variables, confounding variables, common response, and basically chapter 4.2. I'm not sure if you can read this, but hopefully you can. Tomorrow when you come into class, first thing we're going to talk about is example 4.11. Number of television sets per person versus the life expectancy so one's X, one's Y. And basically what they said was there was a high positive correlation. I want to know why. Um, Basically, the basic meaning of causation changing x can bring about a change in y. In other words, um, if you look down here, there's a change in x, okay? Change in x and change in y, both are influenced by z, this outside what we call a lurking variable. Because the z influences x and z influences y, there can seem to be a positive correlation between x and y sometimes. All right? Even though there is no true cause and effect between x and y. In other words, x does not cause y. Z causes both of them, but because it causes both of them, sometimes it can seem, like I said, that there's a positive correlation. So could we lengthen the lives of people in Botswana by shipping them TVs? Or is that just a nonsensical statement? The next one we're going to talk about is confounding, okay? Basically, this is talking about obesity in mothers and daughters, and we're going to compare the two. Um, Sometimes, there are other things that cause obesity. So some of the explanatory variables that we're going to look at, some of the X values are inheritance from parents, so the genetics. Sometimes overeating could cause obesity. The lack of physical activity could cause overeating or could cause obesity, and too much television could cause obesity. And basically, what they found out was when they did a test, the BMI was weakly correlated to the physical activity, diet, and TV. So the only thing that was left was the BMI comparison of daughters and mothers. And that was the strongest because that was at 0.506. So if you have a correlation, now that's not a very strong correlation. That was the strongest that they found. So what happens is we know that um, genetics is not the only cause of obesity, but it is one of the explanatory variables. So what we have is we have a situation called confounding, where we know that X causes Y, but we also know that Z also causes Y. All right. Now there is a relationship between Z and X, and also a relationship between X and Y. So, and what happens is what we found out was that the BMI, when we did the R squared, all right, for the mom's BMI versus the daughter's BMI, that it was 25.6%. Well, what that means is that we can explain only 25% of the variation among the daughter's BMIs from the mother's BMI. So if we can only explain 25% of the daughter's body mass index, that's what that means, body mass index. That's how you define whether or not someone's obese or not. So we can only define 25% of that. Well, that means there's another 75% out here of other causes that are causing that. And that's what we call confounding, where the daughters could pick up bad habits uh, and can be confounding or lurking. So your Z can be confounding or it can be a lurking variable. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about, you also need to know that anytime you see a dashed line, that dashed line represents an observed association between the variable x and y. So there is a relationship between x and y. Now, the other thing we're going to talk about is causation. That's basically a direct response. X causes y, such as cigarettes. Cigarettes cause lung cancer. All right. Now, when we have something called a common response, all right, 4.13, SAT scores and college grades. Now, remember, uh, your common response is where Z causes both X and Y and makes it seem like there is a relationship, or makes it seem like X is causing Y, even though it's not. So in this case, we want to talk about SAT scores and college grades, when actually your R squared is 27%. Your correlation is 27%. That means SAT scores can only, your college grades can only be defined by 27% of the college scores. Now, that means your Z could also be academic ability, the study habits of the students, or staying sober. All right. So another question: does taking Benedictine cause birth defects? Does living near power plants cause cancer? So these are some questions that you need to ponder when you come to class tomorrow. Common response and confounding, along with a number of potential lurking variables, make associations misleading. Hopefully you'll pay attention to that. Again, common response and confounding, along with a number of potential lurking variables, make associations misleading. And whenever we talk about the Benedictine causing birth defects or living in power lines, those are things that we can't experiment with. Those are moral obligations. So for moral or practical reasons, it is not possible to conduct experiments to answer these questions. You can't give people Benedictine and see if it causes a birth defect, or you can't have people live near power lines and test to see if they have cancer. Those are ethical questions. So hopefully you'll read up on chapter 4.2 and come to class with a good discussion.